This video is all about the Express Router module. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to use Express Router to organize your web API code. So what is this for? There's a stern distinction between routing in Express and the Express Router module. Express Router module ships with Express. You can get it out of the box as built-in middleware, and you can use it to simplify your life. Routes in Express can be written however we want to write them. But there is a really cool way and an opinion that Express came with that we can use. It's like that switchboard. We can go and flip that switch and say, we want to use Express Router now to simplify our workflow. As our web application grows, you'll find that the number of resources and routes will likely follow suit. You could have an application that has 1,000 resources, and you can have CRUD operations for each and every single one of those resources. REST allows for that type of architecture. So this can quickly add complexity to our web API. So if you find yourself thinking this server.js file has a lot of lines of code, it's probably time to start breaking it up into smaller bits. Express routers are a way for us to split our application into what we call sub-applications to make it modular and easier to maintain and reason about. And what we're going to do today is really just kind of build this all from scratch. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to use Express routers to reorganize our code for readability. We're going to also discuss common patterns used to structure the files and folders in our web API. And then we're also going to make sure that we have a good refresher of CommonJS, the module system that we use to share our code amongst different files. You have already been using CommonJS in React with your import-export syntax. We are just going to be kind of retrograding back to a version of CommonJS that is not, that was more commonly used before ES6 import-export syntax. We're going to be using require syntax to get this done. So I want you to watch me build an application first, and I'm going to walk you through what I'm doing along the way. And then when it's time, I'll say, okay, we're going to start doing this together. Okay, what we have built here is just a simple Express server. We can invoke server. We're using this route, this global route here. We have one single route. We could put that as a get. We'd be good to go. Okay. So it's going to be up and running on 8,000. So just to show you kind of a tweak, instead of running it on 5,000, we're going to have it set up on 8,000. So if our applications looked exactly like this, routers would not be needed. But imagine now that this application needs endpoints to see a list of users, get details for a single user, add users, modify existing users, and also inactivate users. This has at least 5 endpoints for the user's resource alone. Now imagine this application also needs to deal with products, orders, returns, categories, providers, warehouses, clients, employees, and more. If we have only 5 endpoints per resource, and each endpoint surely will start to grow and will have more than one line of code, we can see how to try to cram all of this in a single file would get unwieldy real fast. So it's like React. You would not write all of your components in one single file. That's why we taught you how to use import-export syntax to be able to throw things around as needed. So what we're going to do is we're going to rewrite this to, into separate files. And from the main server file, we're going to be handling our routes for users there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a file that will handle all routes related to the user resource. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a directory called users. And then inside of that directory, I'm going to create a file, and we're going to call that userroutes.js. Okay. So inside of user routes, I'm going to, of course, require in Express. Remember, I'm doing this now in a separate file. So we have our server.js. That index.js file is no longer needed. Delete that one. And we have our user routes file that we're going to be concerned with here, okay? So now I'm going to say const router, and this is where you get to pull in express.router. Remember how I said it's a piece of middleware, kind of like a piece of, like a package that you flip on? And it's an uppercase R, so this actually comes from Express itself. And now that that's defined, it's actually going to work a little better. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to say router.get, and we're going to say to our global endpoint here, our root endpoint, we're going to have our rec and res, little middleware here that we're building, little route handler, and it's just going to be res.status, back at 200, and .send hello from the get users endpoint. Okay. And this is going to be a little bit kind of interesting to abstract and think about, but why would we say that this is the user's endpoint and not just our global root route? Well, we're going to get there in a minute how we configure this, but just remember, this is going to be pretty much our user's router for all of our user endpoints. So we're going to build these as necessary. So now we're going to say router.get by ID. So anything that comes after our root by ID, we're going to say, rec and res. Very similar message, but in this case, we're going to say, whoops, little typey types, O there, okay. And in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to say, we're going to pull off that ID. Oh my heavens, I can't type today. Const ID equals rec.params.id. And then I just want to see hello from users slash, and then we're going to make sure that we do this inside of a template string. And then we're just going to put ID here. And because we'll be doing it in the template string, we'll be able to use that variable and make it nice and user-friendly. Okay? And now we're going to do a post. So router.post. And we're going to root as well. It's looking really strange, but I promise it's all going to come together in just a second. Just trust me. And then what we're going to do is just say res.status, sending the post, hello from the post, and then the non-user's ID. So just that right there. Okay? Now, here's the kicker. We have just configured a router. So we're going to export it. So the default, this is just like saying export default router, okay? So we're exporting our router from this user routes file. So now we have it available in our server.js file. So you probably are thinking to yourself, like, where are we going with this? Well, here's where we're going with it. We are going to import and define our user routes on our server here. So I'm going to say const user routes equals require, and now I'm going to peek inside of the users directory and find the user routes default object. Okay? And now, because everything is middleware, we can just plug it in as middleware. Server.use. And check this out. This is what's super cool about this. We can say users gets all of our user routes. Okay. So effectively, we just created some CRUD operations, not a full complete CRUD list, but we in our user routes file, inside of user routes, the users directory, we have effectively found and are able to pull in our user routes. So what we're doing is saying, server, go ahead and configure all of these routes onto the URL /users. So /users at root for the GET request is going to send this information back. /users at root by ID is going to send this information back. /users for the post is going to send this information back. So you kind of have to think about this sort of side by side. And it gets a little abstract and it gets a little bit, it's less difficult to maintain than writing it all in one file, but you still need to make sure that you import and export and use properly. So export, import, and configure. Export, import, and configure. Just makes for our life so much nicer. Let's go ahead and boot this up. Let's see if this actually works. I probably have 1,000 typos, Gonna go ahead and delete that. And I'm still in that same app. So let's go ahead and yarn start. And no whammies, no whammies. Okay, we're up and running on 8,000. Let's go to our root, our URL here. Okay. Pull this in, and we're gonna go localhost 8,000. Okay, cannot get, that's good. What happens when we go to users? Woo! What happens when we go to users by whatever ID we pass next? Yeah, here we go. And then if I wanted to, I could go and pop open Postman and play around with it and make it available. Okay. So we're not going to do this together. You've kind of seen this kind of come together. We could have as many of these multiple routes as we'd like. But now it's time to pull open your terminal, get your code all set up and ready, and meet me where responsible. Okay. So you should be at your terminal. We're going to create an empty folder for our web API. We're going to name it whatever we want. I'm going to name it, I don't know. There's a lot that's going to happen here. Yeah, I'll just name it, let's see, what are we calling this? I have a hard time naming things. We're going to call it creatures, okay? We're going to cd into creatures. We're going to run npm init --y. We're going to run yarn add the wonderful express package. That's all we're going to need for this, I think. Yeah, so if we want to test this, we could run a yarn test. Okay, so there's no good command there. If we run an ls, we should have a package.json, some node modules, and a yarn lock file. Let's include, so touch server.js, yarn test. Okay, so yeah, we have a yarn test. Now we could potentially run a yarn start, but we're good to go. Okay. We're going to install the nodemon package at this point. So this is where we're actually going to use nodemon. So yarn install, or yarn add nodemon. Nodemon is that live server that's going to go and refresh all of our stuff. We should have included it in the dev dependencies, but I'm not worried about that for now. Let's actually remove rm force rf the server.js file, and let's create a new file called index.js. Okay. And we should be good to go at this point. We can open up our code, and if we go into the package.json, and instead of we're going to write a little start command for yarn start, and that's going to go and run nodemon over our index.js file. Okay. So we should now be able to open up a server inside of index.js, type const express equals require express. We're going to also type const server equals express, and then we'll do server.use, and we'll just have a global endpoint there to the root with our homies, and res.status 200.send string hello from express app running, and server.listen on port 8000, console.log magic happening on port 8000. Okay. And I think that's all we're going to need to do for now. So if we now go and run our cool yarn start command, look at that. So yarn went and ran node over index.js, but if I go and I save that file again, it's going to refresh the server. So now we don't ever have to restart our server manually again. So let's test this endpoint. Let's test our API here by going over to Chrome or Postman, wherever you'd like to go. I'm going to just run a GET request to 8,000. And it looks like hello from Express app running was logged. Boom. Bada bang, bada boom. Okay, so we're good to go. Let's add our first router to manage we're going to do a races resource. So this is like a D&D server. So we're going to add a folder called races. And inside of races, we're going to add the races routes.js file. We're going to pull in Express. And we're going to configure a router. And we're going to make some endpoints here. So router.get. We need to add our homies to our endpoint. And of course, we're going to send back a list of races. So we're going to go with human, elf, hobbit, wizard, dwarf, orc, and that should be good for now. We're going to res.status that bad boy, .json, back our races. And then we're going to, of course, should be a 200 here, positive response. We're going to, of course, module.exports, export the default router. Okay. So as it stands right now, if we were to go back to our server, you saw that it keeps refreshing, really nice. If we were to go back to where we're requesting this, we just get this main thing here. If we wanted to look for the races that are in our application, that just doesn't exist, right? This works because of the way we're using that server main use right here, that endpoint that we built. Since we're doing it globally, it's just sending back the 200. But now we're going to go change a lot of our things. So what we want to do is we want to pull in our races from races routes. And we want to get rid of all this and just simply configure our URL to be races and use the races routes. You'd probably want to call this races routes as well because you're going to have multiple things. So that's a really good kind of nomenclature to go by. Okay. And then we can do our server.use back our fallback again and just say that our friendly little 200 dot status. I already did the status dot send, and we'll say hello from Express's main. We'll just say Express. So we always have that nice greeting. So look at how we're kind of utilizing this ability to plug our system in. You can think of these routes as sort of middleware. It's just like, hey, whenever this races thing is request, we're going to go to that middleware and we're going to plug in all those routes and we're going to be able to use them effectively. It's a really, really nice way to get this thing up and running. And you could do this with as many resources as you'd like. Next, what we'll do to extend this is you could go to classes. You could have Paladin or Rogue or Druid, if we're talking about Lord of the Rings or some other really fun D&D sort of instance or whatever. But let us go back to our client now. In our case, it is our home. And notice what we get back instead of that cool URL. Oh, look at that. We got an error. That's great. That's really great because I forgot to add rec and res. The homies were forgotten. Now if I go, it works. And notice that I didn't have to kill off and refresh my server. okay? And you could effectively build as many routes as you'd like within your application to map all the resources possible. So this pattern is very commonly seen. You will have node applications and all of your resources will look like this. Whatever the resource is, if it's users, if it's company, if it's products, if it's inventory, all of that can be done in their own separate directories. And then within those directories, you could simply configure your routes. Okay, so this is very, very scalable. Our index.js or our server.js file becomes, only a place to just link things together. And then we build all the other stuff. In later modules, we're going to kind of teach you how to handle formal logic when you're interfacing with database servers and things like that. You're going to abstract that logic into things called controllers, and you're going to kind of see how everything links up. But this is how you would get that done. It's a really, really nice way to organize your applications. Thank you so much for tuning in. There is a challenge for you to complete, of course, in Training Kit. So go ahead, jump right there and add a villains routes to this application, and we will extend it even further as we grow and grow